Hello everyone. As you relax or begin to settle into bed for the day, settle down, listen, and you will learn interesting facts about the world of Bit Heroes. The world of Bit Heroes, a soothing journey through lore and history. Bit Heroes is an 8-bit inspired MMORPG launched in 2016, filled with quirky charm and slow-paced exploration. In this pixelated world, the ordinary often becomes extraordinary. You might find yourself wielding a sword made of watermelon or riding a pink shark as your mount. With its distinctive pixel art and gentle humor, Bit Heroes invites players into a light-hearted fantasy universe that never takes itself too seriously. In this journey, we'll stroll through the lore and history of Bit Heroes, describing the odd and charming features of its world, how players progress through dungeons and zones, the old mechanics, some now forgotten, the rise and fall of powerful gear meters, the dramas and camaraderie of guilds, and the evolving pixelated realm over the years. The tone here is soft and relaxed, like a storyteller recounting legends by a hearth. So get comfortable, and let's explore the world of Bit Heroes together, one pixel at a time. A pixelated adventure begins. Our story opens in Bit Valley, the first zone of Bit Heroes and the gentle starting chapter for every new adventurer. Close your eyes and imagine the lush green fields of Bit Valley stretching out before you, a place where slimes, bats, and goblins roam, all rendered in endearing pixel art. This is where players take their very first steps, guided by a simple tutorial from the very first flag, stage, up to the first dungeon, Grimm's Crossing. Bit Valley feels comforting and familiar, a classic RPG forest realm with winding paths and friendly village NPCs. Yet even here, Bit Heroes' trademark humor peeks through. Early bosses taunt you with cheeky one-liners. For example, a brutish troll named Tubbo greets the player with a caveman-like "Me Tubbo. Me smash yo face," when encountered. It's a playful introduction that sets the tone. This is a world that will make you smile as much as it challenges you. In those early days, circa 2016, Bit Heroes was a simpler game, but already brimming with content. Questing is the heart of the game, a process of pushing through flags and dungeons in each zone. A flag is a short level with a few battles, and after every few flags, a major dungeon awaits with a boss at the end. In Bit Valley's dungeons, you battle comical villains like Lord Cerulean, a skeletal monarch who commands the first zone's final tomb. Overcoming him marks the completion of Zone 1 and proves you're ready for broader horizons. One of the oddly charming features new players discover early is the familiar system. In Bit Heroes, most monsters you fight have a chance to join your team as a familiar. Every time you defeat a monster in a dungeon, there's a small chance a prompt pops up, letting you persuade or bribe the creature into becoming your ally. If you choose Persuade, you spend some gold for a chance, between 10% and 40%, depending on the creature's rarity, that the monster will agree to join you. It's a bit like gently coaxing the monster, "Please come with me." Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. For a guaranteed recruit, you can bribe the monster by spending gems, essentially bribing it with shiny riches to ensure it becomes your familiar. Early familiars include cute ghosts like Boo Boo or playful blobs like Bob and Shrump, all of whom can fight by your side. Many players fondly remember the thrill of seeing the Persuade prompt pop up after a tough battle, holding their breath as the chance plays out, hoping the new friend will join them. This monster-catching aspect gives Bit Heroes a collectible, Pokemon-like charm, and from the very start it encourages you to befriend the quirky denizens of the realm. Progressing through Bit Valley, you also learn the basics of combat and team strategy. Combat in Bit Heroes is turn-based and surprisingly strategic despite its simple look. Your hero can bring along up to 2 familiars, in normal zones, to form a party of 3. Each character, hero or familiar, has stats like power, stamina, and agility, as well as a set of skills. In fact, Bit Heroes has a concept called Total Stats, TS, which is essentially the sum of a character's combat capabilities. New players quickly realize that sometimes it's wise to return to earlier flags and grind, replay dungeons. to get better gear or level up familiars, increasing their TS before pushing further. The game gently teaches resource management too. Running a dungeon costs energy, which regenerates slowly over time, 1 energy every 4 minutes. So early adventuring often has a natural, unhurried pace. You do a few runs, then rest while your energy refills, perhaps chatting with guildmates or doing a bit of fishing, more on that soon. By the time you finish Bit Valley, you've gotten a taste of Bit Heroes' mix of whimsy and challenge. And as you step beyond that first valley, the world begins to expand, both in size and in wonder. Wandering through early zones and quirky lands. Leaving the gentle fields of Bit Valley, players venture into Wintermarsh, the second zone, and beyond. Each zone in Bit Heroes has its own distinct flavor, almost like separate little worlds, yet all connected by the game's irreverent tone. Wintermarsh, Zone 2, as its name suggests, is a frosty realm of snow and ice. Here you encounter yetis and ice monsters, and dungeons with names like Yeti's Tundra and Deathmarsh. The final boss of Wintermarsh is a fearsome ice giant, but of course delivered with a Bit Heroes twist. The boss battle might involve a comedic duo or a punny name. In fact, one notorious encounter in Wintermarsh is the Pengia McGobblestein Alliance, Zone 2, Flag 3, a tag team of a penguin, Pengi, and a goblin who require you to take out the backline first. Little mechanics like this teach players to adapt tactics. In this case, bring a weapon that can hit the back row, perhaps a bow or spear, to deal with a more dangerous foe hiding behind. It's a small example of how even early on, Bit Heroes introduced quirks in dungeon design that made players think and strategize rather than just mash attacks. From the icy marshes you travel to Lake Haven, Zone 3, a swampy lake region with murky waters and undead lurking about. The dungeons here, like Nosdudu Wasteland and Jeb's Chamber, carry a slightly grosser, spookier vibe, and amusing names. One memorable boss in these early zones is King Dina in Zone 3, a particularly tough Dino King who hits fast and hard, so much so that players are advised to reach him with full health and roughly 200 total stats to survive his onslaught. This is where many adventurers learn the value of preparation. Maybe by this point you've upgraded your gear or fused a stronger familiar. Bit Heroes had, and still has, a fusion system where certain familiars can combine into new, more powerful ones. For instance, fusing the common slime Shrump and another creature Gramps yields a familiar known as Shramps, which was a popular companion for many new players in the early game. Fusion recipes like this encouraged collecting various creatures from different zones and gave a sense of progression beyond just leveling up. Continuing onward, Ashvale, Zone 4, presents a land of ash and fire, think charred fields and volcanic caverns. The boss Megazorg in Ashvale, at Flag 8, is an imposing brute that only attacks the front row and required around 600 TS to handle. Players learn to put their sturdiest character, often a tanky familiar or the hero with a shield, in front, and perhaps even rotate party positions during battle to share the damage, a tactic explicitly suggested in guides. By now, you start seeing the importance of team roles. Maybe one familiar acts as a tank to soak hits, another as a healer or support, and your hero as a damage dealer. These roles aren't rigid classes chosen at start, but rather determined by your gear and familiar choices. It's all very organic. You develop your strategy as you gather equipment and allies. Next comes Aramor, Zone 5, a zone with crypts and castles, culminating in the ominous dungeon Necromor. A boss here, Mega Brute, Zone 5, Flag 9, humorously likes to spam healing on himself, so defeating him is a test of sustained damage output to overcome his self-heals. Perhaps around this time, many players start upgrading from epic rarity gear to legendary gear. Equipment in Bit Heroes follows a rarity and tier system. You begin finding epic, purple, gear, but the real goal is to get legendary, orange, items which often have powerful set bonuses or effects. However, upgrading gear is costly in gold and materials, so a common tip is not to overinvest in low-tier legendaries. One guide suggests beating a zone with maxed out epics before upgrading legendaries. since epics are cheaper to upgrade yet can carry you far. These are the kind of minutiae long-time players remember fondly, the little optimization tricks and lessons learned through trial and error. As the journey continues, Morgoroth, Zone 6, plunges heroes into a demonic realm where creatures of sludge and darkness dwell, with dungeons like Moga's Catacomb and Demiroth. By now, guilds have likely become an important part of the experience, more on guilds soon, and perhaps you've even teamed up with guildmates to tackle content. One particularly nasty boss here is King Chewy, Zone 6, Flag 6, an enormous carnivorous plant that does massive damage, tilde 1.5k, to the ally with the lowest HP. This fight taught players about the so-called bait strategy. Enemies often target the weakest link, so you could either use that to your advantage or eliminate the bait altogether. Some would intentionally bring a sacrificial weak familiar, a bait, to absorb Chewy's big hit, while others made sure all team members had high stamina so none of them looked like easy prey. It was a charming puzzle, a boss fight that felt like solving a riddle of how not to get one-shotted. And once solved, players would share advice with each other on global chat or guild chat, spreading these strategies through the community lore. Progressing through Zones 7 and beyond, the game's themes grow progressively more eccentric and creative. Kambora, Zone 7, has a desert meets jungle vibe. Galaran, Zone 8, introduces perhaps a techno-magical fortress, with a boss named the Trilogy who sounds like a comic book villain, and Eshlin, Zone 9, plunges into a shadowy void realm. In fact, in Eshlin's challenge dungeon imposes a unique challenge. Healing is 70% less effective throughout those fights. Suddenly, your familiar little heal spells that you relied on aren't so potent. Players had to adapt, perhaps leaning more on mitigation or offense to finish fights quickly. These zone-specific mechanics became a hallmark of Bit Heroes' design. Each new area would introduce a twist that forced even veteran players to adjust their tactics. It kept the experience fresh and occasionally made older strategies forgotten mechanics when you moved on to the next challenge. By the time players reach Wama, Zone 10, the difficulty and epicness have ramped up significantly. Wama is an end-of-the-world type scenario, with its final dungeon Hero's Ruin nullifying your damage reduction entirely, meaning even the sturdiest tanks feel the full brunt of enemy blows. But fear not, because around these high-level zones, heroes have many more tools at their disposal. Mythic gear, ancient gear, powerful set bonuses, and high-tier familiars fused together into formidable teams. We'll talk about those gear meters shortly, but first, let's step back and see how the game itself expanded over time alongside these zones. The rise of new features and game modes. As players journeyed through those early zones from 2016 into 2017 and beyond, Bit Heroes as a game was evolving. New features and game modes were introduced in updates, adding both complexity and fun side activities to the world. One major addition was guilds. Guilds became available once a player cleared Zone 2, Wintermarsh, and they allowed up to 25 players, expandable to 30 with perks, to band together as a team. Joining a guild in Bit Heroes felt like finding a family within the game. You got a private guild chat for friendly banter, and you could even use your guildmates' characters in your party for questing or dungeons. This meant if you were struggling on a dungeon, you might borrow the avatar of a high-level guildmate to assist you, adding their strength to your team. Guilds also introduced guild honor and guild perks. As you and your mates earned experience points, a portion would convert to guild EXP and honor. Leveling up the guild unlocked perks, passive boosts for all members, and a guild shop where you could spend honor on special pets, accessories, and consumables. There was a real sense of collective progress. Every time anyone in the guild gained XP, the whole guild inched forward. Guilds brought out the cooperative spirit of Bit Heroes, but also a bit of competitive drama on occasion. You see, Bit Heroes added guild versus guild, GVG, events, periodic competitions where guilds would compete on leaderboards for prizes and glory. A top prize might be something cosmetic like a special one-of-a-kind legendary throne for your guild hall. Naturally, friendly rivalries formed between guilds striving to be number one. Within guilds, There were also leadership structures: leader, officers, members, recruits. In the early years, one issue arose when guild leaders went inactive. A guild of 25 could be left without an active captain at the helm. In April 2017, the developers introduced a clever, and somewhat dramatic, mutiny mechanic to solve this. If a leader was offline for too long, 2 weeks for officers, 3 weeks for members, 4 for recruits, then an active member could literally oust them and assume leadership with the press of a mutiny button. This saved many guilds from stagnation under absent leaders. But you can imagine it also led to some tense moments. There were tales of officers quietly counting the days, then pressing mutiny the minute they could, sometimes to the surprise of the returning leader. While we won't dive into specific guild drama stories, to let sleeping dogs lie, it's safe to say that guilds added a rich social layer to Bit Heroes. Whether it was cooperative triumphs or the occasional conflict, guild life made the world feel more alive. Many players still recall late-night guild chat conversations, helping each other with builds, or celebrating when a guild member finally looted that coveted legendary item they'd been chasing. Besides guilds, Bit Heroes expanded with numerous game modes that offered fresh ways to play. The core adventure was always the zones, often called questing mode, but soon players were juggling a variety of activities each day. Raids. Starting early in the game's life, raids were special dungeons, for up to 5 characters, more than the usual 3, where players could battle powerful bosses for high-tier loot. Raids typically correspond to gear tiers. For example, Raid 1 dropped Tier 4 gear, since Tiers 1 to 3 did not have an accompanying raid. As the game evolved, a pattern emerged. New gear tiers were often introduced via new raids or zones. The timeline on record shows a steady progression. Tier 4 in late 2016, Tier 5 soon after, and so on. By 2019, Bit Heroes had reached Tier 11 or 12, and they continued climbing. Each raid brought a new boss with unique mechanics, and usually a set of legendary and set items themed after that boss. Raids were challenging and required teamwork, or borrowing strong friends' guildmates, but they were also repeatable grinds. Many players ran raids dozens of times to collect materials to craft the best equipment of that tier. In Bit Heroes, boss loot isn't always handed directly. Often you gather crafting components from runs and then craft the gear you want at the smithy. This system sometimes felt like a loot lottery. If you were unlucky with direct drops, you could still save up for the guaranteed reward. Trials and Gauntlet. These two modes are often mentioned together, as both are a kind of endurance challenge and both require the player to use tokens. Trials are like special dungeons with escalating difficulty. Gauntlet is a wave-based survival mode. They became a staple weekly event. Players earn Mytineral from Trials Gauntlet, which could be used to craft some of the best mythic rarity runes in the game. These modes encouraged optimizing your team for long fights, perhaps using lifesteal or regeneration effects to keep going wave after wave. Many gear meters emerged specifically for trials. Some equipment would give bonuses like heal X% every enemy defeated, which were obviously great in Gauntlet trials. Successful runs would reward you with materials to upgrade your gear beyond its base level. PvP Arena. Of course, the game also offered player versus player battles. You could pit your team, hero and familiars, against other players' teams in asynchronous arena fights. PvP had its own currency, often just called PvP tickets, and weekly leaderboards. In PvP, certain strategies that worked in PvE had to be reconsidered. For instance, speed was king in PvP for a long time. Going first could decide a match. There were times when a speed meta dominated, with players stacking agility and using fast attacking familiars to one-shot opponents before they could react. But then other metas arose, like evasion builds, gear that gives evade chance, causing opponents' attacks to miss, or shielding builds, using pets and skills that grant shields to absorb damage. The PvP meta seesawed as new gear came out. A particularly infamous strategy was the bait team in PvP, one extremely low HP character, to draw enemy fire, paired with 2 high damage dealers who would retaliate. If an opponent's AI wasted big attacks on the sacrificial bait, the remaining allies could clean up. Counterplay evolved for that too. This cat and mouse of the PvP meta is something that long-time players discuss almost like weather patterns. Remember the evade meta of 2018? Each era felt distinct. Guild wars, GVG as mentioned, guild versus guild competitions allowed guilds to fight for rank. It wasn't real-time battles but more a coordinated effort where guild members attacked other guild teams and earned points. The top guilds got recognition and sometimes special vanity rewards. GVG weeks were exciting and often all 25 to 30 guild members would plan their attacks, share tips on which enemy guild members to target, etc. Victory brought pride, and sometimes rivalry. Some guild names rose to legendary status on each server for always placing in the top. And when a reigning champion guild was dethroned, it fueled plenty of forum chatter. Expeditions and invasions. These are rotating seasonal event modes. An expedition is a special dungeon that often ties into a theme or holiday, available for a limited time. An invasion is similar but generally themed as waves of enemies invading the world. These events usually introduce a temporary currency, for example, Holy Cups during an Easter egg hunt event, or Ice Dragon Scales during a winter festival. Players collect that currency by doing various content. Any dungeon, trial, etc. might drop some event items, and then bring them to a friendly NPC named Sardonex who trades the currency for special rewards. Sardonex is a bit of a running joke. He appears in town during every major event, essentially as the holiday shopkeeper. The game might say, bring your phone cards to Sardonex and get cool rewards during the mobile anniversary event. It's always Sardonex, diligently waiting to exchange goodies. Through him, you could get unique event cosmetics, costumes, skins, powerful artifacts, or sometimes even rare familiars. Because these events run only for a week or two, it creates a festive urgency. For that period, everyone is farming and talking about the event. Seasoned players often guide newer ones. Make sure to grind the invasion during the double drops for more event currency, and so on. The events are one of the things that give Bit Heroes its cozy, ongoing rhythm. Much like seasons in the real world, you can look forward to the Halloween event or the Valentine's event each year, knowing it will come with a fun twist on the game's content. World bosses. As the game's content progressed into the late teens of tiers, T16, T17, the developers introduced massive world boss encounters. These are epic boss fights where a team of players can participate together. The latest introduced world boss was Project Goodall, a menacing world boss featuring Lord Malacrog and his vanguard of minions. What made world bosses special is that they were available to players of multiple level ranges. Project Goodall, for instance, had versions at Tier 7, Tier 14, and Tier 21, so both mid-level and endgame players could tackle an appropriate challenge. World bosses often came with their own set of new gear rewards. Project Goodall introduced 3 new sets of gear, 6 new mythic items, and new fusions to chase. The fight itself is usually on a grand scale. Players would often need to fill a whole lobby to defeat the heroic difficulty bosses. Defeating a world boss yields pinions, a unique material, and loot chances. It fosters a sense of cooperation. You'd see chat messages like, LFGT14 Heroic Project Goodall, and players coming together to help each other. It's quite epic and yet still very Bit Heroes in style. One world boss was literally a family of giants you fight, and another was terrifyingly strong sea titan creatures. Fishing. On the calmer side of things, Bit Heroes also introduced fishing in 2018 as a peaceful minigame. After you clear the first couple of zones, you unlock Fishing Island. There, your hero can cast a line and try to catch pixelated fish of varying rarities. It's a simple timing-based minigame. Press the button when the fish bites. Successful fishing grants you shells that you can trade for rewards. There's even a fishing shop where shells can buy unique cosmetics or materials like mount guts, the item needed for upgrading mounts. Fishing in Bit Heroes is a delightful distraction. No combat, no danger, just you and the tranquil 8-bit water. Many players enjoyed it as a break from the intensity of dungeons. And of course, Bit Heroes being Bit Heroes, some of the fish have goofy designs or names, adding a bit of humor. Imagine catching a unicorn fish, for instance. Over time, they even added fishing events and competitions to see who could catch the heaviest fish during a week, etc. It's one of those mechanics that not everyone engages with daily, but it's comforting to know it's there, a bit like the fishing pond in a cozy RPG town that you wander to when you need a respite. All these modes meant that by, say, 2018 to 2019, the daily life of a Bit Heroes player had become a rich routine. A day might look like, log in, claim daily bonuses, do a few PvP arena battles, run a trial and gauntlet for tokens, coordinate with guildmates to do the guild dungeon or invasion event, spend remaining energy on questing new zones or farming a familiar you're trying to fuse. There was always something to do, and each activity offered its own rewards, shards for raids, badges for guild events, tokens for trial gauntlet, etc. This multi-currency, multi-game mode system kept the gameplay varied. It's like a buffet where you sample a bit of everything each day, rather than grind the exact same thing over and over. It also made progression more multidimensional. If you hit a wall in questing, you could improve your gear via other modes. If you got bored of PvE, you could focus on PvP for a while. Gear, growth, and the shifting meta. One of the most fascinating aspects of Bit Heroes over time is how gear progression and meta strategies changed with each expansion. In an RPG, the meta refers to the dominant tactics or builds that players find most effective at a given time. Bit Heroes, despite its old-school veneer, had an ever-evolving meta driven by the introduction of new gear rarities and set bonuses. Let's start with gear rarity. When the game began, the pinnacle of gear was legendary items and set items. Sets in Bit Heroes are pieces of gear that grant extra bonuses when worn together, 2-piece, 3-piece, etc. Early sets might give you simple bonuses like increased damage or healing when 2 pieces are equipped. As you collected 4 pieces, you'd unlock the full power of the set, which often could dramatically enhance a certain playstyle. For example, an old set might boost your fire damage and empower you for each enemy alive, great for certain area of effect builds. Players in the early era often mixed and matched these set items with regular legendaries to optimize their stats and abilities. However, as new zones and raids were added, the developers introduced mythic gear and later ancient gear, which were even higher rarities. These items typically had even more unique effects. The interesting thing was that set, mythic, and ancient items of the same tier had comparable base stats, ensuring that even the fanciest items didn't make older ones completely irrelevant purely by stats, but their bonuses and abilities made them stand out. A mythic item often has a unique skill proc or a stronger stat combination than a regular legendary. For instance, a mythic sword might have a chance to double cast a skill, or an ancient armor might passively reflect some damage to attackers. Such traits could create new strategies. Each time a new tier was released, alongside a new raid and zone, there was a period of excitement and experimentation. The community would analyze the new set bonuses, mythic abilities, and ancient powers. Content creators and official YouTubers like Bitverse Andy would often showcase the new gear, theorycrafting the best combinations for PvE and PvP. An example from a mid-era, around tier 13 or so, a mythic offhand might allow your attacks to revitalize, or basically leech health, and suddenly lifesteal builds became a thing, where tanks could sustain themselves by draining enemy health each hit. Or a set might grant a powerful empower bonus, increasing your damage significantly, which birthed high burst damage playstyles. One constant balancing act was between offense and defense. In PvE, being too fragile could get you killed, but being too tanky might prolong fights until you hit enrage mechanics. In PvP, if you went full offense you risked getting outlasted by a tanky opponent, but too defensive and you'd never scratch an enemy with high regeneration. The developers tried to keep multiple approaches viable by introducing gear that catered to different roles. Tank gear often had stats like bonus block chance, damage reduction, or health shields. Healer support gear might increase team-wide effects, or provide extra healing, or turn speed buffs. DPS gear increased raw damage, critical hits, or multi-hit chances, like dual strike, quad strike rates. Hybrid gear sometimes offered combinations, enabling the beloved Paladin-style builds, moderate damage, moderate healing. There were periods where one role reigned supreme. Then a new set would come that gave tanks the ability to reflect damage or auto-heal, swinging the pendulum back. The devs also issued occasional balance patches. Notably, in March 2017, they reworked the agility stats influence on turn order. Prior to that, stacking agility could make you act much faster but at the cost of power, damage. The change made turn rate depend on the sum of power plus agility, meaning whether you split your points or focus one, the overall damage over time stays similar. This was a significant meta shift. It meant players no longer had to dump everything into agility to be viable, and could choose different stat distributions without sacrificing turn speed. Essentially, build diversity opened up. You could be a slow hard hitter or a quick light hitter, and both would average out in damage per second. Many long-time players remember this as the patch that ended the speed meta of the early game, allowing more creative stat builds. Another interesting element of gear meta was builds named after famous heroes or monsters. For instance, one build has become legendary among players, and it is known as the Chuck build, named after Chuck, the original player to bring the build to popularity. This is an extremely potent all-ancient gear tank capable of soloing some of the game's hardest content. Strategies like that feel like folk remedies or secret techniques passed down by veterans. Of course, as the game progressed and new tiers came out, some older sets and builds eventually got overshadowed by newer ones with bigger numbers or broader effects. That's the rise and fall of metas. What was once a cutting-edge strategy might later become a mere footnote in the history as new content outmodes it. To keep gear interesting, the developers often gave tier-themed set bonuses. For example, in a tier set in a steampunk city, Steamfunk City, Zone 16, the gear might have a bonus related to randomness, since that zone's quirk was random effects misbehaving. In a Norse-themed tier, Fenrir's Omen, Zone 15, maybe a set allowed a spirit wolf pet skills or gave water damage. These thematic touches kept the lore and mechanics intertwined. You weren't just grinding abstract numbers, you were earning the power of Fenrir or the technology of steampunk, and it felt like part of the story. One particularly large meta change came with the introduction of augments, runes, and enchants. These are additional layers of customization for gear that were added as the game matured. Runes are slotted stones that grant bonuses like +% damage, +% speed, etc. They could be upgraded and were often farmed from trial gauntlet or events. Enchants are special enchantments you could apply to gear, often with unique effects, like a chance dual strike on skills or absorb attacks. Augments were a later feature that allowed fine-tuning stats on familiars and gear, giving extra stats or abilities. For example, Neurian stimulator augments could act similar to a pet would on a player but for the familiar using the augment. While these systems provided depth, they also added complexity. A side effect was that some earlier mechanics became less prominent or forgotten. For instance, before augments existed, players cared a lot about maximizing base stat distribution on each level up. After augments, you had more ways to compensate for stat weaknesses, so the old discussions about optimal stat builds quieted down. Similarly, in the very early game before runes, having the perfect gear piece mattered immensely. After runes, even a suboptimal gear could be improved by slotting good runes. The focus shifted from just the item itself to the whole loadout of item plus enchant plus rune plus augment. Through all these changes, one thing remained true: Bit Heroes is cooperative at heart, but also fosters a friendly competition to optimize and improve. Whenever a new update dropped, the community buzzed with analysis. Active YouTubers like Bitverse Andy would publish videos showing off new gear and giving advice, essentially acting as modern-day bards telling the ongoing tale of Bit Heroes. These community figures contributed to the lore in their own way, by keeping the history of meters and updates, and by engaging the devs with questions. For example, Bitverse Andy did a piece on the state of lore events 1 year after they were announced, noting how the community was eagerly waiting for that promised content to arrive. Such commentary became part of the collective memory of the game. Evolving lore, from zones to lore events and the Bitverse. Up until now, we've focused a lot on the gameplay aspects, zones, mechanics, gear. But what about the story and lore of Bit Heroes itself? Initially, the game's story was fairly light-hearted and loose. Each zone had a theme and a few NPC dialogues, often comedic. There wasn't an epic linear narrative like you might find in a single-player RPG. Instead, the world-building was done through humor and setting. For example, one zone might have you chasing a villain who has stolen all the toilets in the land. Yes, that was a thing. While another zone might involve helping a rockstar god party hard. It was zany and fragmented in a charming way. In fact, a developer interview later confirmed that Bit Heroes' strength was being able to include any theme, no matter how crazy, and still fit in this universe. They gave examples. Galactic Trials, Zone 19, is a land of gladiators, priests, and space pirates all thrown together. Olympian Secret Party, Zone 17, is literally a secret party of gods, a play on Greek mythology but with a rave twist. And Big Claw, Zone 20, the newest zone, revolves around a tribe of humanoid chickens in a canyon shaped like a giant claw. If that sounds wildly mismatched, that's the point. Bit Heroes embraces the unpredictability, allowing wildly different themes to coexist, bound together by a consistent tone of humor and 8-bit nostalgia. For a long time, players didn't mind the loose story. It was mostly about the journey and the jokes. But as more zones were added, a kind of metalore did start to form. Recurring characters like Melvin, a nerdy scientist character, or references to earlier events would pop up. By Zone 11, titled Melvin's Genesis, it was hinted that much of the world might even be a simulation or creation by Melvin, adding a sci-fi layer to the lore. Then in Zord Attacks, Zone 12, a modern city is invaded by a giant mech, Zord. Something straight out of a superhero comic, showing that the Bit Heroes world had advanced technology pockets. In Ancient Odyssey, Zone 13, the lore swung back to ancient civilizations, with temples and curses akin to Mayan or Aztec myth. This hopping around in theme actually painted a picture of a truly kaleidoscopic world, one where anything was possible, because perhaps the very nature of the world was magical and tongue-in-cheek. Recognizing this rich backdrop, the developers eventually decided to delve deeper into lore. In March 2024, they announced a new era for Bit Heroes Quest, focusing on lore events. Instead of only adding more zones that only endgame players see, they plan to introduce story-based events that all players could participate in, regardless of level. These planned lore events would run for several months each, unfolding storylines piece by piece. They envisioned new PvE modes in these events where difficulty scales dynamically and players are restricted to thematic gear, to make things interesting and shake up the usual meta. There would also be community-wide objectives, meaning the entire player base works together to achieve some goal, and when they do, something changes in the game world for everyone. This was truly exciting. Imagine an event where players collectively gather resources to rebuild a town, and once completed, a new area or NPC appears in everyone's town as a result. It promised to make the world feel more alive and responsive. The lore events were also meant to tell continuous stories connecting back to previous narratives. The devs admitted that the Bit Heroes world is full of rich and humorous stories that they hadn't properly explored yet. Lore events would be their way to finally string together the threads, possibly explaining how these disparate zones tie into a grander tale. The mention of narrative established in the lore events prior to it suggests each event builds on the last. Importantly, they reassured players that lore events would not completely replace new zones. They know players still crave new areas, monsters, and gear to conquer. The plan was that they would add zones more slowly, and potentially even allow the community to help kick off the creation of a new zone by collectively completing certain content. The idea was to pace out zones so they aren't so gated, since only a minority had reached the last zone at any given time, while giving everyone something fun to chew on in the meantime. The first lore event story was hinted to involve the Bitverse, an expanded universe concept that had been brewing. Bit Heroes, as it aged, became the flagship of a bigger initiative by Kongregate, the publisher, to create an interconnected set of games called the Bitverse. In 2022 to 2023, Kongregate launched 2 spin-off games, Bit Heroes Arena, a battle royale style survival game, and Bit Heroes Runner, a side-scrolling runner game. These games have different gameplay. Arena is combat, Runner is an endless runner, but they share the same pixel art style and quirky themes. The cool part is they introduced the idea of a cross-game avatar, a Bitverse hero NFT that could be used across all Bitverse games as a character. Bit Heroes Quest, the main game we're focusing on, was integrated with this Bitverse concept, hence why it's often called Bit Heroes Quest now, to distinguish it from the other titles. The lore began to hint that all these games' events are in the same universe. For example, Zone 20, Big Claw in Bit Heroes Quest tells the story of how the entire Bitverse was created by a being named Cluck Gothra, from the perspective of an isolated chicken tribe discovering ancient secrets. This ties directly into the broader Bitverse lore, possibly explaining elements in the other games too. The Big Claw Zone's lore was actually inspired by Bloodborne, yes, the dark gothic game, as the lore master cheekily admitted, involving a primordial chicken myth. It's a perfect example of Bit Heroes blending parody with genuine world building. By 2025, the stage was set for these lore-rich events to begin. However, there was a bit of a calm before the storm. After the announcement in early 2024, players eagerly awaited the first lore event to drop. Months passed, and the regular cadence of small updates, events, minor patches, continued, but the big lore content was still in development. Fast forward to March 2025, and folks were wondering when the promised new story chapters would arrive. The community had gone through a year of silence on that front, as one commentator put it, with no new zones after Big Claw and no lore event yet launched. The developers, for their part, likely were taking the time to get it right. Designing a whole new system and narrative isn't easy, especially on a live game. In the meantime, seasonal events kept rolling. Valentine's 2025 featured an Astaroth Eternal Love event with romantic undead themes, and Summer 2025 saw a Chulhu-esque invasion with tentacled monsters as hinted by teasers. The game also embraced some modern trends by experimenting with Web3 NFT integration. As mentioned, the Bitverse Heroes NFT avatars became a thing around late 2022, and by 2023 they integrated NFT heroes in a way that could provide some gameplay boosts and serve as unique skins. Kongregate even rebranded the game's title screen to emphasize Bit Heroes Quest as part of the Bitverse, signifying this as their flagship in a larger connected universe. Some veteran players were wary of the NFT angle, but it remained entirely optional. You could still play for free and enjoy everything without touching blockchain stuff. The developers stated they wanted to make blockchain tech accessible without forcing it on players. As the world of Bit Heroes stands now, it's in a fascinating place. The game's content spans 20 zones, from the humble Bit Valley to the Grand Big Claw Canyon, 18 raids, each adding a chapter of gear progression, up to tier 21 gear so far, and numerous side modes and events. The community is full of seasoned players who have seen meters come and go, and new players who are still setting foot in Bit Valley for the first time. There are guilds that have been around for years, with leaders who shepherd their flocks through every guild event, fostering a sense of family. The developers continue to tweak and add, sometimes dropping surprise updates, like a new world boss or a quality of life improvement, and interacting with the community via Discord. Perhaps what makes Bit Heroes truly special is that it's both static and evolving. The pixelated art and the core gameplay loop give it a timeless, almost old-school feel. You could leave Bit Heroes for a year, come back, and Bit Valley will still be there, with Tubbo still threatening to smash your face in the first flag. But at the same time, the game doesn't shy away from change. It introduced entirely new systems, runes, augments, shifted its progression model, with lore events on the horizon, and even jumped into cross-game integration with the Bitverse. Through all this, it maintained that mix of silly and sincere, never losing the tongue-in-cheek humor even as it crafted deeper lore. A living, breathing pixel world. To conclude our gentle expedition through Bit Heroes' world, let's take a bird's-eye view of how far it has come and the comforting patterns it has established. Bit Heroes is over 8 years old now, as of 2025, and in that time it has quietly built up a rich history that rivals many bigger budget games, albeit in its own quirky style. Players who started as young adventurers in Bit Valley years ago might now be guild leaders guiding newcomers through the same path they once trod. The old zones we discussed, like Wintermarsh, Ashvale, Arramore, might feel like a distant, easier past to someone decked out in max tier 21 gear, but they hold a nostalgic charm. Occasionally, events, milestones, or daily quests encourage high-level players to revisit those zones, and when they do, they often chuckle at how simple the dungeons seem compared to the gauntlets they're used to. It's akin to revisiting your elementary school. Everything looks smaller than you recall, but the fond memories come rushing back. Mechanics like carefully choosing whether to bribe or persuade to catch a familiar, or exploiting a boss's gimmick, are remembered with affection. Oh, remember when we used to farm the goos in Zone 7 and pray for a deflect? Good times. The rise and fall of gear meters is also part of the collective memory. There were times when if you didn't have that one set piece or that mythic accessory, you felt at a disadvantage, only for a few months to pass and something new takes its place. In retrospect, these shifts kept the game interesting. They gave each era a distinct identity. An old player could likely tell which year you joined by asking, what was the must-have item when you started? If you answer, everyone wanted Lucky Witchum Ring for evasion, they'd smile and say, ah, you came during the evade meta, around 2021. If you say, people were rushing to craft Kakfirken, they'll nod knowingly, the great chicken revolution of 2023. There's a comfort in this cycle. It mirrors how things go in real life too. Technology, trends, they all move in cycles, and those who stay long enough see them all. Guild dramas have, surprisingly, forged strong bonds. Yes, sometimes guilds split over disagreements. Maybe half want to be competitive, half want to be casual. But even those splits often end with everyone finding a place that suits them best, and many remain friends across guild lines. The top guild often know each other well, sometimes too well. They might have Reddit threads or Discord channels where friendly trash talk ensues during GVG events. But at the end of the day, all Bit Heroes players share the same small world. Global chat is a common meeting ground where someone might ask a question, how do I beat Big Claw D3 on Heroic? And even a rival guild member will answer with advice. There's a sense that we're all in this fun, grindy, silly adventure together. Each of us just a collection of pixels, riding our pixel mounts into pixel dungeons to get slightly shinier pixels. The pixelated world of Bit Heroes has indeed evolved over time, but it has done so in a way that is more additive than transformative. New layers added, none completely removing the old. If you log in today, you can still run Raid 1, Tier 4, and fight the classic raid boss from 2016, and then in the next hour challenge the brand new world boss introduced in 2025. The game preserves its history even as it moves forward. It's like a growing library of content, and every piece, every zone, every event, becomes a chapter in the larger story. And what a story it is! From humble beginnings in Bit Valley to the cosmic revelations of Big Claw, Bit Heroes has quietly crafted a lore as patchwork and endearing as a handmade quilt. It's stitched together by community memories, official events, and that irrepressible comedic streak. Perhaps in the near future, we'll finally see those lore events play out, maybe an epic that ties everything together, The true purpose of Melvin's experiments, the fate of the Bitverse, the reason a primordial chicken created existence, who knows? When that day comes, players old and new will likely gather, as excited as children at storytime, to experience it together. For now, the world of Bit Heroes continues to turn at its gentle pace. Daily quests reset, Sardonex arrives for the next event with a grin and a new currency to collect. Guildmates trade friendly jabs about who forgot to do their guild contributions, and somewhere a newbie just squealed with joy at persuading their very first boo-boo ghost to join their team. In the end, Bit Heroes is more than the sum of its pixels. It's a feeling of camaraderie and nostalgia, a game you can play to relax and unwind. Its lore and history, as we've explored, provide ample fodder for tales by the campfire, or should we say, the tavern. Whether you're here for the bedtime story calm or the documentary-like detail, Bit Heroes World welcomes you with a warm, pixelated embrace. So as our sojourn draws to a close, picture your character back in the cozy town of Bit Heroes. The 8-bit sun is setting, casting a golden glow over the pixelated fountain where players convene. Perhaps you open your inventory and look at a piece of gear, maybe it's that trusty old weapon from years ago, and you recall the journey it took you on. All around, the NPCs are shutting their shops for the night. Even Sardonex is packing up his event stall until tomorrow. Your guild chat pings with a last good night from a friend in a different time zone. You've learned a lot about this world tonight, its funny little secrets, its grand adventures, its ups and downs. Bit Heroes World keeps spinning, slowly but surely, and who knows what new wonders the next dawn will bring. For now, you can log out or lay down your weary head knowing that this charming pixel world will be there when you return, with all its interesting facts, lore, and history waiting to welcome you back. Sleep tight, hero, and may your dreams be filled with epic loot and friendly familiars. The world of Bit Heroes will carry on its story, one pixel at a time, until you're ready to embark again. Sweet dreams and happy questing.